Right now, somewhere in your life, a woman is testing you, and you don't even know the test has started. It might be a coworker who pauses half a second too long before answering a simple question. It might be a woman at your gym who keeps ending up on the machine next to yours without either of you ever saying a word about it. You are not imagining these moments. You are simply not trained to read them because most men have spent years looking for interest in what a woman says instead of paying attention to what she quietly protects when no one is watching closely. High-value women rarely announce their standards out loud. They reveal them through behavior. In small decisions, most men walk right past. And here's the question that will sit with you for the rest of this video. What is the one thing you are doing right now without realizing it that is quietly telling every high-value woman you meet that she does not need to choose you? By the end of this video, you are going to see it clearly, and you are going to understand exactly what to do about it. The first boundary isn't something you say, it's something you stop saying. Most men, when they feel a spark of interest from a woman, respond by over-explaining themselves, why they were late, why they haven't called, why their week has been a mess. It feels polite, it feels considerate. In her mind, though, it registers as something else entirely. When a man narrates his own behavior without being asked, psychologists call this over-justification, the unconscious habit of offering reasons before anyone has requested them, as if seeking pre-approval for existing as you are. It signals quietly that you are not fully certain your choices are acceptable on their own. A high-value woman notices this instantly, even if she couldn't name what she noticed. Think back to a conversation that once seemed ordinary, one where you found yourself explaining a decision no one had questioned. That reflex is worth examining. Of course, context always matters here. Explaining yourself to someone you deeply trust in an established relationship is different from doing it reflexively with someone you just met. This is not about becoming cold or withholding. It is about recognizing the moments when explanation replaces confidence. The correction is almost uncomfortably simple. Say less about your reasons. Let your actions carry the weight instead, even when it feels uncomfortable at first to leave a silence unfilled. You might be thinking, isn't this just about being mysterious? Not quite. Mystery is a performance. This is the absence of a performance altogether, which reads as something far more rare and far harder to fake convincingly over time. But silence only works if something else backs it up, and that something is how you treat your own time. She's not checking if you're busy. She's checking if you have a life she'd want to be part of. When a man is available at every hour, replying within seconds, no matter the time of day, it feels generous on his end. From her side, it often reads as the opposite, a signal that nothing else in his life is competing for his attention. Behavioral researchers who study mate selection describe this as a scarcity cue, the idea that perceived value rises when access to something is limited and falls when access is unlimited and constant. This is not a manipulation tactic. It is simply how human attention has always worked, long before dating apps existed. Picture a man who takes a few hours to respond, not because he's playing games, but because he was genuinely absorbed in something, a project, a workout, a conversation with a friend that mattered more in that moment than his phone. That gap is not rudeness. It is evidence of a full life, and a full life is magnetic in a way constant availability never manages to be. One late reply proves nothing on its own. A consistent pattern of protected time, however, tells her something true about how you value your hours. Now, you might be thinking, doesn't this risk seeming disinterested? It can if taken to an extreme. But there is a real difference between deliberately ignoring someone and simply living a life that does not orbit around your phone. Most men swing too far one direction. They either respond instantly out of fear, or they go cold on purpose out of a book they read once, mistaking coldness itself for strategy. Neither is the goal. Time is the first boundary she can see. The next one she can only feel. Somewhere in the last month, a woman said something just to see if you'd flinch. It may have looked small, a joke at your expense, a comment about another man, a slight change in tone during a disagreement. These moments are rarely accidents. Psychologists refer to this as affect testing, a way people unconsciously check whether another person's emotional state can be shifted by pressure, which tells them how stable that person truly is underneath the surface they present. She is not trying to hurt you, she is trying to find the floor beneath your emotions, the place where your composure actually lives when nothing is going your way. A man who reacts with sudden defensiveness or who overcorrects with reassurance reveals that his emotional footing depends on her behavior in that moment. A man who stays level, genuinely level, Not performing calm while seething underneath the surface reveals something psychologists call emotional object constancy, the ability to remain steady towards someone even when a single interaction feels uncomfortable or unfair. That steadiness is rare. It is also deeply reassuring to someone deciding whether you are safe to invest her time and attention in. Of course, staying level does not mean staying silent about real issues. There is a difference between composure and avoidance, and on some level, she can usually tell them apart, even if she can't articulate exactly how. You might be thinking, isn't reacting sometimes the honest response? Sometimes yes, but there's a difference between an honest reaction and a defensive one, and the tell is almost always in the speed. The common mistake here is trying to prove you're calm out loud, insisting you're fine in a tone that suggests otherwise entirely. Real steadiness rarely needs to announce itself, and the men who have it are usually the last to bring it up in conversation. If your emotions don't move her off course, the next test is whether your space does. There's a moment most men let slide without noticing, and she notices every time it happens. Picture a group setting. A friend interrupts you mid-sentence, talks over you twice in a conversation, or makes a joke that quietly undermines something you just said in front of people whose opinion matters to you both. Most men laugh along because reacting seems petty or because confrontation feels like it would make an easy evening worse. She is watching what you do in that half-second window, whether she realizes she's watching or not. Social psychologists describe this as a status confirmation moment, a brief exchange in which observers unconsciously determine where someone ranks within a group based on how that person responds to being challenged. Letting the moment pass without any acknowledgement every single time it happens quietly lowers where she places you on a scale she isn't even consciously keeping. This does not mean every interruption requires a correction. A single instance, especially among close friends who mean no harm, usually means nothing at all. But a consistent pattern, one where you are repeatedly spoken over and never once redirect the conversation back to yourself, tells a very different story about where you stand. The fix is not aggression, and it was never meant to be. It is often as simple as calmly finishing your sentence or returning the conversation to where you left it without raising your voice or turning a small moment into a scene. You might wonder if this makes you seem overly sensitive to something small. It doesn't, as long as it's done without heat. Calm redirection reads as ownership, not fragility. Most men either escalate the moment into open conflict or disappear from it entirely, letting the room quietly decide who they are on their behalf. Neither approach protects the space you're actually standing in, and both leave an impression that lingers longer than the moment itself. Protecting your space matters, but there's a boundary even harder to hold, the boundary of your own voice. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that a good man says yes. She was never taught to respect that man. Saying yes to every request, every plan, every favor feels like generosity from the inside. From the outside, especially early in getting to know someone, it can look like an absence of any real preference at all, as if you have no shape of your own. Researchers who study compliance behavior have found that people who agree instantly and consistently without any friction whatsoever are frequently perceived as having lower self-regard, not because agreeableness is bad, but because it removes any observable evidence of a person's actual boundaries. A woman cannot respect limits she has never once seen you hold under any pressure. This is where the word no becomes disproportionately powerful. Not a harsh no, not a dramatic one, simply a calm, unapologetic no, delivered without a paragraph of justification trailing behind it. You might be thinking, won't that make me seem difficult or uninterested in her? Only if it's delivered with tension underneath it. A relaxed no, followed by genuine warmth and presence in the very next moment, communicates something entirely different than a cold one ever could. Of course, this does not mean withholding for the sake of appearing strong. A manufactured no is as transparent as manufactured mystery, and women tend to notice performance quickly, sometimes faster than the man performing it realizes. The common mistake is apologizing for the no, softening it word by word until it quietly disappears entirely, turning what should have been a boundary into another version of yes wearing a different sentence. This applies as much to small requests as large ones. The pattern forms in small moments first, long before it shows up in a decision that actually matters. A man who cannot say no to a minor favor rarely finds the footing to say no when the stakes are higher. This is not about keeping score. It is about noticing whether your yes still means anything, or whether it has quietly become the only word you know how to offer. Your voice sets boundaries in the moment, but attention sets them long before she ever speaks to you. Attention isn't something you win, it's something you stop giving away. Many men spend early attraction chasing her focus, liking every post within minutes, texting first after every gap in conversation, restructuring their day around the small possibility that she might reach out. It feels like effort. It often reads as the opposite of what he intends it to communicate. Attention researchers describe a principle sometimes called gravity versus chase, where a person who maintains a stable center of interest rather than orbiting someone else's entirely becomes the one others find themselves pulled toward instead. This is not indifference, and it should never be mistaken for it. A man who is present, engaged, and genuinely interested when he is actually with her, but who does not organize his entire day around her responses, creates a kind of psychological gravity that constant pursuit simply cannot replicate, no matter how sincere it is. Before we move to the next layer of this, there is one detail most explanations skip entirely. This is not about tracking her behavior to calculate the perfect amount of distance to keep. That calculation itself becomes a form of chasing, just a quieter, more disguised one. The real shift happens internally, when your attention is genuinely occupied by your own life rather than performing detachment while secretly checking your phone under the table. One instance of distance means very little on its own. A pattern of genuine presence paired with a full life outside of her means a great deal over time. You might be thinking, isn't some pursuit necessary at the start? Of course, initiating contact and showing interest is not the problem. The problem is when pursuit becomes the entire foundation with nothing else holding your days together underneath it. A useful way to notice this in yourself is to ask what your week would look like if she never texted back at all. If the answer is that very little would change, you are already standing in the right place. If the answer is that your entire mood would shift for days, that is worth sitting with honestly, not as a criticism, but as information about where your gravity currently lives. Attention is what she notices day to day. Standards are what she notices when it matters most. The men women remember aren't the ones who stayed no matter what, they're the ones who were willing to leave. There is a quiet difference between rigidity and standards. One many men never learn to separate clearly. Rigidity says no to everything out of fear or ego dressed up as principle. Standards say no to specific things, because those things conflict with something the man has already decided matters to him personally. Behavioral scientists studying trust formation have identified something called commitment credibility, the idea that a promise only carries real weight when the person making it has demonstrably been willing to walk away from things that violated their own values before. A man who has never once walked away from anything cannot actually prove his commitment means something real. His yes has no contrast to stand against, so it carries no particular weight. This does not mean threatening to leave or using distance as leverage in an argument. That is manipulation wearing the costume of standards, and it rarely survives close observation over time. Genuine standards are quiet. They look like ending a conversation that has turned disrespectful, or choosing not to pursue someone whose values clearly conflict with your own, without ever turning it into a performance for her benefit. Of course, this requires actually having examined what your standards are in the first place, rather than borrowing a list from somewhere online and reciting it under pressure. You might be thinking, doesn't walking away risk losing someone worth keeping? Sometimes yes, but a person who is only kept through the absence of standards was never fully kept at all. Most men either never test their limits at all, avoiding the discomfort entirely, or they test them loudly in a way designed specifically to be noticed and rewarded by an audience. The quiet version is the one that earns trust precisely because it was never built to be seen in the first place. It happens in a conversation with no witnesses, in a decision no one else will ever hear about. In the moment you close a door on something that would have been easy to keep open a little longer than you should have. Every boundary so far has been visible to her. The last one is the one she can't even name, but feels the most. Remember what I told you at the start of this video, that there was one thing you were doing without realizing it that was quietly telling high-value women they didn't need to choose you. We are getting close to it now, closer than you might expect. Here's the boundary no one talks about, because it isn't something you do in front of her. It's something you do when she's not there at all. Every boundary covered so far, your silence, your time, your emotional steadiness, your space, your voice, your attention, your standards, is downstream of something more foundational than any single behavior. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as internalized self-regard, the private, unwitnessed relationship a person has with their own behavior when there is no audience left to perform for. It shows up in whether you keep the promises you make only to yourself with no one checking. It shows up in whether you follow through on the workout you told no one about, the goal you never announced out loud, the standard you hold even when breaking it would cost you nothing, and no one would ever know the difference. Women cannot see this directly, not in any single moment. What they see is the residue of it, the calm that doesn't need to be performed, the confidence that isn't waiting for validation from the room, the boundaries in the previous 7 areas that never needed conscious effort because they were simply consistent with who you already are underneath. This is why some men can memorize every signal, every boundary, every piece of advice available, and still feel like something is missing the moment they try to apply it in real life. The technique was borrowed. The foundation underneath it was never actually built. A man who respects himself in private does not need to manufacture confidence in public. It is already there, quiet and unforced, requiring no performance at all, no rehearsed lines, no strategy pulled from a video watched the night before. Of course, this is not built overnight, and no single decision creates it in one afternoon. It is built the way trust is always built, in the slow accumulation of small moments where you chose integrity with yourself when it would have been far easier not to. This is the pattern you could not see at the start of this video. Not a technique, not a line to say. A way of living that becomes visible to her, whether or not either of you ever puts it into words directly. Once you see this pattern in yourself, you'll start seeing it and its absence in every man around you. Everything we've walked through today, the silence, the time, the steadiness, the space, the voice, the attention, the standards, and the self-respect beneath all of it is really one truth wearing 8 different faces. High-value women are not choosing the man who performs confidence the loudest. They are choosing the man whose smallest, unwatched moments already tell the truth about how he values himself. You don't need to memorize all 8 and apply them like a checklist tomorrow. Start with the one that felt most uncomfortable, because that discomfort is usually pointing at something real. Which of these 8 boundaries do you already hold, and which one is quietly costing you the most? Tell me the number below. I read every comment, and these conversations shape what we cover next. Next time, I'll show you the exact moment inside a first conversation, usually under 4 minutes, when a woman decides whether you're a man worth investing in.